All right. Hello, hello, hello. We are ready to go. I want to know if you voted, when you voted, how you voted. Did you participate in democracy? Because today we just want to talk about the hope for democracy, record numbers of people voting. And because of that, I have my best friend. I'm so excited to have a co-host on Intercultural Spark today. My best friend, Wendy Swart. Hi, Wendy in Boston.
Hey, how are you, Deanna, in beautiful Chicago?
I'm so excited. It's great here. She's the co-founder of Creative reFrame. She's a longtime political organizer and activist. She's a professor of arts and innovation and entrepreneurship. Today, we're also inviting, tell us about, we have Uzochi coming on.
Yep, we've got Uzochi coming in. He's originally from Chicago, but lives in Boston now. He just graduated from Harvard in May, and he's now the assistant director of the Union of Minority Neighborhoods.
Fantastic. We also have Dr. Stephen Maynard Caliendo, who has actually not slept. He's already been on Fox News this morning, CBS. He is the Dean of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Political Science at North Central College. He's also done extensive research in political psychology, which is probably a good topic nowadays, and political communications. And then we also have
Veronica. Veronica is also an originally a Chicago native. Now she's back here in Boston, where she went to law school, and she is a powerhouse of an attorney, an immigration attorney, working with Greater Boston Legal Services. But for the last big chunk of her career, she has been working as the founding executive director of Project Citizenship, basically helping people to go through the process so they can become U.S. citizens, so they could have been ready to vote yesterday. So.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Chicago's in the house today, and welcome to Intercultural Spark. All right. Hello, hello, hello. Amazing panelists. Thanks for everyone to be here. How's everyone doing?
Hooray.
Tired.
I don't know why. Was everybody up all night? Holy moly. God.
I was.
Yeah, it was a long night.
Yeah. Well, so, that kind of begs the question, in terms of what's happening this year. Some might say there's an erosion of democracy. I mean, there was so much, there was media diatribe, there was fear mongering, the attack on the post office. I know that's the one that got me to volunteer to be an election judge. But at the same time, I think there's like 20 million more people who voted this year than the past. So at the same time, is that hope for democracy? So I'm actually going to toss this out to Stephen, to you first, because I know you're already talking about this morning on the news. What do you think? Is it the end? Is it the beginning? What's your thought?
There's a lot of elements of democracy that are important, and voting is a primary aspect of it. And so I'm always happy to see more people voting. It's great to have people engaged. It wasn't just that they cast ballots, but people were paying attention to the election. They were engaged throughout the process, and that's really important. I think the concerns about the erosion of democracy are coming from some of the discourse that's happening surrounding not only the election, but over the past 4 years, questioning the reliability of some of our stable institutions like the media. And certainly, the president's speech at 2:30 in the morning Eastern time last night, suggesting that any voting that happened, or any counting that happens of votes that were legally cast, should stop, because he was ahead in the early part of the counting, is deeply problematic. And so we're weighing some of the rhetoric and communication that is concerning to me against the excitement of having so many people participating in the process, some of whom had not participated previously.
Makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious about with you, Veronica or Uzochi, do you have some thoughts on all that too?
Well, I the Professor Dr. Caliendo, how are we defining democracy? Because I think that's one of the important questions of what is it? Because if it's just self-government, then yes, it's happening. It's kind of a mess, and we don't know the results yet. But I was really happy that there's been no rioting, that there was record turnout, and kind of heartened that people on the news were talking about the different kind of Latinos. It wasn't just like, how did the Latinos vote? It was like Colombians, Venezuelans, Cubans, Mexicans. Like, there was a distinction, an understanding that people aren't just a color or aren't just a gender, that it was more complex.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. I agree. And I think there's been a lot of concern among folks who study race and ethnicity in particular, but among people, activists as well, that lumping any group in as a monolith is problematic. And I think the pollsters tend to do it. And when the pollsters do it, then we absorb that through the news media. And so there's going to be a lot of reckoning with the pollsters again after they were wrong on a number of things this time. And I think that's an important part, Veronica. I think that's going to be one of the things that they're going to have to come to terms with. And that's positive. I mean, that's great that conversation will take place. It's important.
Well, I think that's fascinating. The section, if you kind of think about, certainly in politics, we're always thinking about what are our different constituency groups that we're going after, or trying to bring into the fold, if you will.
Right.
And wondering too, over with at the Union of Minority Neighborhoods, Uzochi, did you see a lot of that coming up ahead as well?
In terms of trying to attract certain voters, yes, definitely. So our Black Ballot Power, we definitely went after, so to speak, a lot of Black voters and a lot of young Black voters. In 2016, I believe Black votership went down 5% from 2012, right? So we tried to turn that around this year, and as everyone already mentioned, we had record turnout overall. So that's a positive trend. And then we'll see, how things turn out ultimately in the end, coming days.
And as a reminder, this all happened during a pandemic, right?
Exactly.
It's crazy that we were afraid to leave our houses, that we're afraid to go to polling places, that people followed all these instructions to drop off ballots and mail them, and just it couldn't have been more complex.
Right.
And the second part of this too, I'm thinking about, is that whole idea of fear, right? And that the fear that we talked about, but then how fear can sometimes actually bring things to maybe even a more hopeful place, because the whole idea of fear bringing urgency, helping then voter turnout. I'm wondering if there's a correlation there.
Yeah. So the question is why is voter turnout so huge in this election, right? So I think that goes with the fear that, it's been a pretty tumultuous summer, right? And everyone's kind of trying to affect some change, whether it be, conservatives or Democrats, right? Or I guess independents. But it is the kind of a fear that's causing people to go to the polls despite the pandemic, I would say. So
I think Uzochi, I'm interested to hear your take. It's impossible to tease out the excitement about President Trump or the concern about President Trump with the mechanisms that we put in place because of the pandemic to make it easier to vote. For instance, more states adopting early voting and in more locations, and certainly mail-in voting, which is getting a lot of the attention. And so my question, I'm wondering, as for people who are working to expand the franchise and to detangle the bigger piece of voting, are these mechanisms that we ought to use in the future when we're not in the midst of a pandemic? In other words, a number of states were voting by mail for a long time. Now that everybody's had an opportunity to do it, was that a pandemic solution, or is that something that you would argue we ought to keep in place because it helps people to vote?
I think that it makes sense to continue going forward with it, right? So statistics have shown that people cheating in terms of voting for mail-in ballots, things like that, that's essentially non-existent, right? So there's no reason not to keep these in place to franchise more people. So I think that the answer to that question is certainly, in my opinion. I'd like to hear what everyone else thinks, though.
Well, the lawyer in me is worried about the inconsistency among states about when votes get counted, and wonder if it would be helpful that there'd be a clear rule, because every state does it differently. And if there's a challenge for Pennsylvania, it's going to be around this issue of how long can you count a mail-in ballot? Is it postmarked? When was it opened? All these issues, and the cutoff, I think, is Friday at 5. I don't know why there's a cutoff if it was properly postmarked. So these issues are going to have to be thought through. But I totally agree that all these new ways of voting and higher voter turnout should be encouraged, and is so promising.
Right.
Such a messiness.
Oh, that's a good word. Promising, hopeful, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Insanity.
I was just thinking it was such a messiness about our federalist system. It's, that is a 200-year-old problem of a bunch of white guys who were concerned about a central government that was too powerful. And here we're left with, situations where not only states controlling voting, but most states leaving it up to local municipalities to decide how they're going to move forward in for a lot of the decisions that take place around elections. So it's a mess for sure.
Does anyone know how long it used to take to find out who the president was in like the early 1900s or the late 1800s? Because certainly it wasn't, 8 p.m. you log on and the person's ready to concede. Yes. So we have to remember how this worked before and how ballots were counted, and it can be slow.
Right, and remember the speed came when the early results were able to be calculated alongside of exit polls. And so, that's how the predictions get made. It's sort of like, what the tendencies would be in certain areas, and then you merge that with the early votes as they come in, and you can make a projection. And so we didn't have exit polling. We haven't had exit polling for very long. So, we typically let the states do their work, count their votes. And, we have until January 20th until the president has to take the oath. And we have to get the electoral college together in December, of course. But there's plenty of time to get all the votes counted before decisions have to be made.
Right.
Fascinating.
I hope we don't need all that time.
I hope we don't either.
Yeah, hopefully not.
I'd like to know
that
time.
Yeah. We need it for the lawsuits, though. I would just say, because the president, in his remarks last night, invoked the Supreme Court as if he could just pick up the phone and call up the people that he put on there and said, will you take a look at this? Something's wrong. When, of course, we know that it has to move through the system, starting with challenges at the state level and then moving up through the federal system. And so if anything's going to take a long time, it's probably not going to be the counting. It's going to be the arguing about the counting, right? But
it makes no sense to say, let's stop counting because there's 2 minutes left in the game and I'm winning, right? That was sort of because if we stopped it now, Biden's winning. So it just made no sense. And it was just a huge power grab, which was disappointing and just disillusioning to people who voted. And we need to wait. We need to wait until everyone is counted, even if we don't like the results.
Well, and I would add too, it was disappointing and also inconsistent because at the same time he was arguing that that the Fox News should not have called Arizona because the counting was still continuing. So where he was behind, he wanted the counting to continue, and where he was ahead, he wanted it to stop. And it was a very odd, disappointing moment in American politics for sure.
And you guys will have to excuse me. For some reason, I can't see anybody anymore. So if I can. It's not because I don't love you.
I can see you. You look great.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's what I was really looking for.
Looking for a compliment.
So Wendy, what are you thinking? Because you've been in so many campaigns and you've lived this, politically for so long. Were you up past midnight? Are you?
Wait a minute. We're supposed to be interviewing you.
But you have a wealth of knowledge.
I've just been around it a lot. Yeah, I've been involved in politics and electoral politics since 1988. It's been fascinating. Quite frankly, my husband and I do a very different take. My husband, Evan Grossman, is a big political numbers wonk, and he was being interviewed and was really looking at the whole guide all night long. For me, I was really trying to completely avoid everything and check into a nice BBC period dress movie myself. So, but I have to say that and keeping on the hopeful piece, because that's where hope and inspiration are pieces that get me up in the morning. And that's the piece that was really completely blew me out of the water today, is the numbers. The numbers and numbers. The groups of people that have been involved who are so disenfranchised. And, again, it's like, is that coming from fear? I think it is, but how can we turn the fear into something that actually we can bottle and keep with us as we move forward and hopefully keep this democracy together, So we're not going back to England, Veronica. We're not going to say the great experiment failed.
But I'm not a fan of the Electoral College, I have to say. I understand this tyranny of the majority, and I don't like it when I'm in the majority, right? So it's disturbing. It's disturbing that we're looking at very few states, that these are the states that are controlling it, that Florida going one way meant all these other issues. that people aren't just voted. It almost like encourages the gerrymandering, right? It encourages the lines being drawn. We're not restricted by state by COVID, right? Like that, we've seen that, this analysis that if you're from this state, that you have these rules. And we're seeing it again in this election of like where you voted matters and how your vote is weighted. And that bothers me. I voted in Maine, which was really interesting and cool. And I'm proud to have been able to vote in Maine. But it doesn't feel like the people in Pennsylvania should get more of a say, or the people in Michigan's voices matter more than Massachusetts, where it's sort of like, well, the electoral college is irrelevant. Your vote doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think we're the number. It's going to be a while till we have the final numbers, but it looks like that president will lose the popular vote by more than he lost it 4 years ago. And if Vice President Biden ends up winning the presidency, well, now we're going to have the third time in 5 elections that somebody was elected with a popular vote that's less than the opponent. When that had happened, when it happened in 2000, it was only the third time, and it was the first time since 1888 when that happened. But it's a function of a system that was put in place for reasons we can discuss, but certainly the mobility and the density of our urban centers are getting drowned out in favor of a process that really disproportionately weights small states. Certainly they don't get the attention during the campaign. So I think Veronica's point's a good one in terms of which states matter and which states don't. But the reality is that the weight of an individual's vote in a small rural state is heavier than those in populous states as a result of the electoral college. And I think it's important to have conversations around that as well.
Well, it brings up some interesting issues around demographics. And I'm curious about with Uzochi working in really the inner cities in Boston. How does that resonate with you?
That's a good question. I would say that, like Veronica said, in Massachusetts, it seems that everyone kind of knows what way Massachusetts is going to go, right? So in terms of the presidential election, it's, it's no, I don't want to say it's less important, but it seems like it has less gravity than if it were, in Pennsylvania or in Michigan or even Georgia, right? So it's kind of like that, I guess. It's like, it doesn't have less gravity, but it seems to have less gravity for a presidential election. But people still came out and voted, so that was good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we know that has implications for down ballot races, which are so important, and people's votes are more important in those, of course, because the smaller vote total, you have more of a chance to influence the election, and that matters a lot, not just for Congress and the Senate, but for your state races, for your local races, in places where those are on the same ballot. If people feel like the high-profile race, they're not going to make much of a difference, they may stay home. When really it's important that they get involved in local politics too.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the options to fix that, to fix this electoral college problem? Like what are the options other than destroying it, ending the electoral college, which I can't imagine ever happening? I've seen and heard about states sort of fixing it state by state. And I'm thrilled that you endorse federalism, Stephen, but I think it's showing sort of its weaknesses here.
No, I was saying it's the messiness of federalism. It wasn't an endorsement. I think that's a problem. I think it's outdated in a lot of ways because it was a relic of what the framers were fearful of. They were worried about a monarch. Typically I would say we ought not to be, although the last 4 years and some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House, we're probably a little more fearful of the way we've heard that described in terms of power of the presidency. But I can take a stab at answering, Veronica. There are a number of possible solutions short of, because you're right. I mean, it takes a constitutional amendment to get rid of the electoral college, and the small states are very unlikely to go for that because, again, their power is disproportionate as a result of having it. Although if it happens enough times that the popular vote doesn't match up, there could be an erosion of public support for that institution. And so I wouldn't want to predict that it would never go away. But when you ask Americans most important problem facing the country, the electoral college generally doesn't rise very high on their list of things they want to get rid of. Maine and Nebraska are interesting cases, right? Because they don't do a winner-take-all system for their electors. They do it on a winner-take-all for two of their electors, and then use congressional districts to decide. And that mattered the last couple of elections. It mattered. Certainly, it looks like it's going to matter in this election that the one congressional district will split off. That's one option. Any state can do that at any time. Any state can decide to do it. Doesn't run afoul of the Constitution. Another proposed solution would be proportional representation of electoral votes, right? And that was on the ballot in 2004 in Colorado, where they considered having their 9 votes awarded proportionally. So if the Democratic candidate got 51% of the vote and the Republican candidate got 49, it got 5-4. But, states, the reason that failed was because people thought that Colorado would be irrelevant, because who's going to go there to campaign for essentially 1 vote to get a 5 instead of a 4, as opposed to going and getting all 9 votes and then, your state.
And it was interesting that I was actually working in Nebraska in the congressional district, in the 2nd congressional district. And the big thing is like, why are you working in Nebraska? Who cares about their 5 electoral college votes? It's like, because it's proportional. And the 2nd congressional district actually ended up going for Biden. And so here comes those 2 electoral college votes. So I just got a text from Deanna. It looks like her internet.
You did fabulous. I was watching you on YouTube. I was actually watching you. Wait. I'm like, it's like when you try to look, I'm like, I was trying to look, we'll join you if I can.
Oh.
Here, you're doing great.
Because I can't see it. And this is just like, but moving right along, I'm going to put on my poker face and pretend that we're dancing as fast as we can.
That's
Thank
so
God
funny.
for the feet underneath the swan.
It's interesting. Can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting the way that you went. The way that you went in terms of the electoral college, because I have to admit, like, I have friends in Alaska that were like, you have to vote for our candidate, and I did do phone banking for Florida, but it bothers me a little bit how bipartisan that we've gotten, that it's Republican or Democrat, and that it's no longer the issues that affect you immediately, but how can we just have, 2 separate parties and have one win? My solution is I think we need more political parties. Like, I think that the right has gotten too far right, the left has gotten too far left. And I feel like it would behoove us to have more parties to choose from, because this whole division thing it doesn't make sense to me.
Right now, Deanna, are you starting your own political party? Is that what I'm hearing? Is this the announcement?
Wait. Veronica already has the endorsement of the entire country of Mexico. Didn't you get honored? She got honored by Mexico. So yeah, I mean, if I can have people, Uzochi does political organizing. Stephen can run our whole media outreach. Wendy strategy. What would our platform be if we started a party right now?
But Deanna, there's no money to be able to run a campaign as an independent or to create a new party. And that bothers me, right? The amount of money that candidates need
it's wrong.
to run. It's wrong, right? Because
I mean,
they
the billion, we're into the B's now. So.
Right.
Yeah, it's a campaign finance problem. It's also a structural problem. The fact that we use a first past the post model of elections rather than proport. I mean, in a lot of Western democracies, they allot seats to their legislative bodies in proportion to the vote of the party that it received, right? And so that you can have minority parties smaller than the major 2 parties represented
Wait, say that again. It's so funny. This is where I get to be like, I won't even call it the dumb person, but say that again in a way that I understand.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, we have a congressional race, and there are 4 candidates running from 4 different parties: a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, and a Green Party candidate. Only one person's going to Congress, and because of the financial system and because of the way we structured our elections, it's going to be the Democrat or the Republican in most cases. But we don't have to do that. We could have a nationwide ballot with 435 seats and put the parties on the ballot instead of people, and the parties would be allocated seats proportionate to the amount of support they get, which would force coalitions to be built, because you would have minor parties represented in the legislative body. We already do coalitions. We do them before the election here. That's all. So,
I was in Brazil. My husband is from Brazil. He is a naturalized citizen, Veronica, and we did it in Boston before you were there. It probably would have been easier. But we were in Brazil during one of the elections, and there, it's hilarious. We were at dinner, and on TV, anybody who wants to run for president gets to do like a 30-second, almost like a YouTube commercial. It was hilarious because we had someone riding a horse into town and, it just really crazy stuff. But it was anybody who wanted to run got equal time to get their platform out. I don't know how that plays out in the voting in bringing that up, but it was more the idea of the people to the people, that people could appeal at a personal level.
Uzochi, as a 22-year-old,
Mhm.
just getting involved in, in this whole world, I'm so
Mhm.
curious as, has this, and I think this is one of your first jobs really where you've been really full on in politics, or if you'd even consider politics as organizing politics, participatory democracy pieces. Are you, did you catch the bug? Is this something that's going to be now a defining piece of your life?
Yeah, I've definitely learned a ton while being at UMN, and I've learned a lot about just civic engagement and the importance of it. A lot of people, like I said, I'm 22, so I'm pretty young, and a lot of people my age are pretty disillusioned, for good reason, I think. So I know a lot of people who, you know, who normally vote blue, who are deciding like maybe I don't even want to vote, right? Like I'm not happy with either party. People are kind of tired about like, people are tired of the lesser of two evils, whether you mean that, whether you think that's like the blue or red or independent, or whatever it may be, right? So it was interesting seeing that side of things, then seeing the other side of things about like the importance of civic engagement, the importance of like making your voice heard regardless of because I don't think that for anybody, I don't think this is, or for most people rather, I don't think this is like the final stage, right? No matter who wins, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, to continue building a better America, building a better future, whatever you think that may be, right? So I think that I've definitely caught the bug in many ways, right? I want to go into healthcare, but I want to do a lot with healthcare equity. A lot of that is like different policies and there's different levels to that. So yeah, definitely I'm learning a lot from everybody on this panel, from everybody in my own organization, and it's pretty cool to see.
What do you think for everybody? We talk about there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And sometimes I wonder, how do you quantify that? And then how do you turn that into policy? I mean, let's take an easy one, like equity and combating let's take an easy one, like combating institutional racism. Where does that actually become the content of what you're talking about? I'm thinking like identity politics, or where does that become the application of the law? Stephen, I don't know if you've done stuff like that because you have the whole project on race and political communication, but do you see what I mean with that distinction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it's a great distinction. In some ways, you could frame it. One could frame it as a chicken and egg kind of an issue. I think that you could have a symbiotic relationship between those things as well. I mean, when we have to change conversations for sure, and some of that is identity politics. I think that word is weaponized a lot, or that phrase is weaponized a lot. But we all embrace it. We all have identity politics. It's just that some of our identities are more visible than others, and some of them are part of the majority that we can pretend don't exist. And so when we have the conversations meaningfully, when we engage with each other authentically on those issues, we can change the conversations. And I think we saw a lot of that happen this summer with people in the streets and people organizing around social media and raising consciousness of folks. It's slow. I mean, it is not an immediate kind of thing where the light bulbs just go on and people say, I get it now. They start to get it, but then it has to feed. It has to continually be a process of reflection and new information and challenging the way we've previously thought about the world, because we've been taught to think about the world in ways that is not accurate and is not fair and is not equitable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you mean by that? So when you say we, who's we and they in that situation?
No, I mean American. I'm talking in the context of the United States, although I think we can have a global conversation about this. But I don't mean just white folks. I think that everybody has been taught that there's a hierarchy, implicitly that there's a hierarchy, a racial hierarchy, a gender hierarchy, and hierarchies related to other aspects of power. And we embrace those subconsciously. It's not that we, get a membership card and we say, okay, now I'm on board with white supremacy. We're on board with white supremacy because it's baked into the soup that we're swimming in on a regular basis.
Right. It reminds me of Isabella Wilkerson's new book, Caste, where it's just, it's the framework of how we're set up. Man.
That's right. And the danger of that in the United States, of course, is of the myth that it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It is. It's bad enough that it's there, but then we're taught that it isn't there, and we can point to examples of people for whom a social class is permeable, but they're standout star examples. It's not the rule, and so then we're taught to ignore the statistical realities of the fact that people who are born wealthy will probably die that way, and people who are born poor are more likely to die that way.
Sure. And Uzochi, I saw you nodding your head. What did that make you think of when Stephen was saying that?
I agreed with like a lot of what Stephen said, to be honest. The first thing I want to, address is it's not only a slow process, but it's also a process that has to be kind of, hammered home again and again and again, right? Because people tend to forget, people tend to like lose steam over time, right? You don't really see any riots anymore. You don't see people protesting and marching anymore. But does that mean that does that mean that after the greatest, voter turnout in maybe history, I don't know the history for a long time, does that mean that voter turnout gets to drop again soon? Does that mean that we stop organizing, we stop marching, we stop advocating for? I don't want to be like partisan or whatever, but does that mean that we stop voicing our opinions after someone gets elected? Right, mm-hmm. It's a long process, and I think it's important.
Well, then it's about holding people accountable, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
right.
one thing to get elected; it's another thing to get reelected, and it's another thing
exactly.
we are watching. We are watching.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. But what you tend to see is that people after an election, people tend to kind of do their own thing and not follow suit, and then right when another election comes up, right, then they tend to make more promises, right? So it's like, can we hold our elected officials accountable throughout the entire term and kind of hold their feet to the fire and actually influence legislation? And I'm hoping that because voter turnout was so high, we can continue to keep that going, continue to keep that on a roll.
Yeah. Who was it who said the price of democracy is eternal vigilance?
I didn't know there was going to be a quiz.
That was one of my dad's favorite quotes.
That was I know this.
Come on, Uzochi, save us.
I know. Frederick Douglass.
Somebody Google that. Frederick
Douglass.
There you go. Well, let's talk about, we're talking about accountability, and we're talking about how people stay active, and we're talking about how ideas stay in the forefront of, sort of the social public conscience. So I would like to talk about the role of media, because I feel like media, I felt the media did a disservice to all of us this time, because it used to be, the media was supposed to objectively, I guess that never happened, but objectively report things. And now everything seems so partisan. What's the role how did you all feel about media coverage, and what's the role of media? Can it be, or do we need to change that system in terms of how media covers politics in the world? Veronica, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I also wanted to just circle back to a point Uzochi made, and maybe we can talk about it later. But I think it's hard to expect legislators or the president or even the judicial branch to get things done when there's such a gridlock, right? When it's so polarized and no one's getting anything done. So we've seen, time and again, a Republican Senate blocking the Democratic president's nominees. So it's sort of this like polarization. And I'm reminded when my kids were young, and I was told that if you were dividing up dessert or a sandwich, have one kid cut it and the other kid choose which half, right? And tell them that's the rule. And there's no incentive to get along, to come to some common solution. And so the same with the media. It's like the media depends on what you're watching. And during the pandemic, when I was trying to figure out make decisions for the office about whether to open, what to close, all these issues, I would watch Fox News and then switch to another channel, and it was just completely different story. And somewhere the middle, the truth was somewhere in between. And it's a lot of work for an average viewer to be trying to sift through all this differing information to find truth. And I think what bothers me the most is that truth or fiction versus nonfiction is now a political or subjective decision, and that's just not the case, right? There's science and there's facts, and then there's fiction, and it's all kind of now aligned to political preference.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important. There's so much there to unpack. I'm not one to harken back to the good old days because they weren't good for lots and lots of us. But there was a time where the news came on the 3 network evening newscasts, and studies showed at that time that they were essentially the same. They say the same stories, maybe in a little bit of a different order, but whether you tuned into CBS, ABC, or NBC, you were essentially getting the same information gatekeepers figuring out what was important. I don't suggest that that's better, but everybody was tuning into the same type of information. With the proliferation of partisan media in particular, and that does not start with cable TV, it starts with AM talk radio, starts in the 1980s with Reagan regulation rolls back of the Fairness Doctrine. And so now you have this proliferation where we can engage in what scholars call selective exposure. I only expose myself to information that allows me to feel comfortable. I won't challenge because it's uncomfortable to do so, and we resist that. It's a psychological principle of cognitive dissonance, right? So now that we have that, though, Veronica is exactly right. Our realities are shaped by the information that we have, and it's vastly different depending on what you're exposing yourself to. So then we talk past each other. There's no possible way to connect, and that's why I think when you see this heightened partisanship, it's not surprising that people are saying almost literally, I don't know what they're thinking, because they don't know what they are thinking because they're not in that world. They're not in that information environment. So it's impossible.
Right. And the question is, I guess, like, how does that, change? You've already seen like Twitter and Facebook of little by little started to like flag posts that are blatantly wrong, blatantly misleading, but it's clearly not enough. So like, where do we go from here is the question.
Yeah. Right, but I've also seen where Facebook and Twitter are flagging things that are also opinions about things. Like I feel like they're almost in the effort to try to curb hate speech or curb lies. I think in some cases they're also curbing opinions. Or am I just being convinced of that by media reports about it?
But I don't feel like anyone called out the president yesterday when he declared victory, right? That should have been a uniform. No, that's not the way it works. And I wasn't watching Fox News, so I'm really curious what the floating headline was on Fox News about that announcement that he'd won.
I am too. It should have been roundly criticized by every Republican elected official. They should have come out. And I mean, it was 2:30 in the morning Eastern time, so I don't expect they all were awake. But when they woke up and found out he said that, they should have been very clear how problematic that was, not just from a political perspective, because he should want the votes to be counted if he ends up winning. He should want that to happen, but that he would do. And look, we're so far away from the normalcy that we didn't even question the fact that he was having a political event at the White House.
Right.
We don't have political events at the White House.
Apply to him. Right.
Because he's done it so frequently recently.
Well, that's
we don't even question that part of it. Yeah. So but I think people need to call that out, and I think there's a place. Journalists are supposed to be objective, but they shouldn't be neutral. And I think we see that comes out as clearly as anything in the climate change discussion, where media outlets feel like they're going to get accused if they don't have a scientist from each side. Well, you got to look pretty hard to find a scientist who doesn't believe that climate change is real, right? But they'll find one. You can always find one, and then it's sort of like it looks like it's equal. It's not equal, right? And so somebody has to be responsible for sharing that with us. But I think, as Deanna points out, the danger is you veer toward an accusation of bias. Because that's what we go to anytime it's an inconvenient truth, as since we're talking about climate change. If it's inconvenient truth, then there must be bias.
Al, where are you now?
Yeah. It also feels like, though, when we look at, it's so interesting, I'm going to go back to identity politics for a minute, because the reason is because it feels like in some ways there's so many hyphenations, and that people, I'll start with myself. So as a white person, I used to say I was just white when I was doing more work in race and politics. So I used to not say I was white. I was just me, because that was the majority culture. Now it's identifying, let's say I'm Jewish, I'm a woman. So there's more things where I will say, okay, this is my identity. But if you go outside of the US, so US American, before gender, before religion, before race, there's certain things that are just really US American. And I think what I'm getting at when we look at we want to be equal, it also plays into, because it feels like we're trying to give equal voice and equal time based on race and identity. And that seems to be taking forefront over ideas. Does anyone else feel that? Or how that's what it feels like if you're going to have both, which you can't, but if you're going to give equal weight, let's say, to all opinions, where does truth or science or the commonalities fit in? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about that. I want all reasonable opinions to have weight, and who decides what's reasonable. But things that are just factually inaccurate or problematic. Do I want equal time for Holocaust deniers? Do I want equal time for white supremacists? I don't. I think those run counter to the principles of democracy. I think there can be parameters that we ought to agree on as a society, and that's broken down. And part of it is because it's paid media. I mean, there's money to be made by giving people what feels comfortable. And other countries have state media that isn't state run. I'm not talking about like North Korea state media or China state media, where it's just propaganda arm for the government. I'm talking about like the BBC, which doesn't have a profit incentive. That's fully funded by government, but it's not controlled at all by government. It's controlled by professionals who run the organization. We've never considered, well, I don't know about considered, but we certainly have never had anything like that because we've had a for-profit media system, yet it's the only for-profit entity that has constitutional protection, which is really tricky, right? Because we're protecting it because of its important place in society, yet it has to be driven by profit or you go out of business. You know, if you don't sell enough airtime on commercials, then you're not a media organization.
So any other thing? So I just don't know if there's anything that what's the hope? I guess what is the hope as we move forward? I wish that it could be, I painted my nails red, white, and blue for democracy, for being an election judge. I mean, I felt like it was really important to be active and involved this time. I felt like it was important to bring such smart people together here to even talk about it. What is next? Like, is there anything we can do in the meantime? Are we just waiting to see the outcome? What action? Tell me what action each of you is taking.
I've been hopeful because I'm seeing friends like people on the call, phone banking all over the country, going to other states to help with polls, like just going above and beyond donations for the first time ever to candidacies, being involved in small politics in other states, right? Like carrying across state lines and trying to make a difference. And that has given me a lot of hope, and seeing, this new generation of voters being so active and so they believe what we taught them is what I've been told. Like our kids believe what we taught them, that their voice mattered, that things were fair, that it would be counted, and that they could make a difference. And so I'm seeing that, and that upswell gives me hope for democracy. But I don't know when this polarization will even out a little bit, when the discourse will be more civil, and we'll be talking about policy and issues and not sort of personal attacks back and forth.
I wait for that day. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely have a lot of hope, and I've seen a lot of people begin to educate themselves on a variety of like issues, like racial issues, cultural issues, just the past few months, right? And I think that's integral to democracy, right? Having an educated base on how you're going to vote, how you're going to act as a citizen. In addition, I think that I have hope for people, acting in local and state elections. I think that there's a little bit less gridlock there, and people can still use their voice in strong ways there. So there's definitely, a lot of hope in different ways, and we'll see what happens.
For me, I think Uzochi's my hope. I hope that doesn't sound patronizing because he's young or dismissive of Veronica's work and important contributions. But I see, as a college professor, I'm constantly engaged with that age group. No matter how old I get, they never change their age. Their age is always in that same 4-year period. It's amazing, and I'm consistently motivated and hopeful because of their work. This is a generation who, and I think it's a twofold answer. One is they don't take no for an answer. They don't, which can be really annoying when you're a parent or when you're a professor. But they don't take no for an answer. They're not going to have it. They're not having the baloney. They're going to call it out. And secondly, related to it, they understand it better than we did. My parents raised me to believe that most of what the problems were with regard to identity oppression were interpersonal. If you're just kind to people, if you just love people and don't judge people harshly because of things that are immutable, then the world will be better. And that's a fine place to start. But I think now as far away we are from the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and realizing where we are, it's much more complicated than that. And Uzochi's generation understands that. And it's a very complicated thing to understand. They're going to understand it. They're going to raise their children to understand it. And they're going to be in power in ways that will help dismantle those systems that have perpetuated inequality and inequities.
But don't they first have to get the power?
we're gonna help them get it.
Yeah.
We're gonna help them get it. Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
There you go.
So, and well, actually, and for anyone who's watching live, we invite you to ask questions or to share comments just in the comments. Actually, I think the next election that may just happen naturally. I was even wondering for Uzochi. I mean, all of the people running are like older than your grandparents. You know, it does seem funny that in day-to-day society, we almost like throw away older people, and yet they are all of our representatives and candidates. So it's,
don't you think that to me is exciting? It's like we need young leaders. It's like where are and we're starting to see them more and more. The 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, that we can all just like, yes, this is today, this is tomorrow, as opposed to this is the way it used to be, and we're trying to fall over the finish line. So, Uzochi, we need you.
I did just want to thank, so for Veronica, I know your great work to have people who are currently legal residents in the U.S. to help them on that path to citizenship. And I apologize if you all talked about that while I went and left and got coffee. And, and also, I'm going to pull Project Citizenship, but also, Stephen, you've got the new edition of your book out now as well. So,
yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a collaborative effort with Charlton McElwain at the New York University, and we're in the second edition there. But the reason I don't ever feel guilty plugging that one is I only wrote a little bit of it. I edited it. There's like 75 contributors from around the world in various academic disciplines that contribute to that volume. So it's exceptional, and I can say that because, again, I didn't write very much of it. Maybe that's why it's exceptional too.
That's fantastic. I think we already said this. This probably shows my age as also having I have a son who's actually just now in college. But Uzochi, you're doing the community work, but also just graduated from Harvard pre-med. So congratulations. You're clearly on the road to all the faith that we have in you. Any questions anyone has for each other just on the conversation that we've had? I appreciate the ground that we covered. We were looking at the idea of hope for democracy, which we started with, the identity politics, and then also the role of media. So I appreciate that. I'm hoping all of you will stay for a second after we end our live broadcast. But thank you all so much. Wendy, anything? Thank you so much. Wendy, we've been friends for, I'm not going to say how many years, but how much fun to actually be able to do something like this with new technology to be able to have this conversation.
I love being able when our worlds collide. It's just so, I love it. I just need to, there's a great quote that I want to add that's on the, something really that's helpful for me, on the outside of the Boston Public Library, right on Boylston Street, that hopefully someday we'll be able to walk back into again. And it says, the Commonwealth requires the education of our populace as the safeguard of order and liberty. And
I love that.
To me, that's like the public libraries, the youth, the participatory democracy. This is how we build for tomorrow. And thank you so much, the three of you, for being a part of this interesting conversation and creating time in your day when we're all a little exhausted after.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. I'm surrounded by incredibly smart people, so I'm learning a ton just being here for 47 minutes.
Feeling the same way. I'm so honored to be in this room virtually with you. I've learned a lot too. It was a good time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wendy always gives me hope. So
actually, that's true. Me too. And actually, and I was. Oh, I'm sorry, Veronica. I totally just cut you off because I'm embellishing that Wendy's always inspires hope.
Go ahead, take it out.
And I did love actually that my internet went out and I got completely knocked out because when we created this panel, it was because I really can't control what's happening and I don't know what's going to happen today. And I love that when I'm not sure if I have anything to say, that the universe was like, then don't say it. So stay here. I'm going to end our broadcast, but stay in the room for a minute. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.